When I logged into our joint account that morning, I thought I'd mistyped the password. I tried again, then again. Each time, the same cold message blinked back at me, invalid credentials. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my marriage truly ended. It had been 21 years since I first met Daniel. Back then, he was a quiet accountant with gentle hands and a nervous smile. I was the one who spoke too much at dinner parties, who dreamed aloud about buying a little house with a lemon tree in the yard. He used to laugh and say, "You'll make it happen, May, you always do." And for a long time, I did. We built a life together in a sleepy suburb just outside Houston. A beige house with blue shutters and a fence I painted myself, even though he told me I didn't have to. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Every Friday night, he brought home takeout from the Thai place on West Avenue. Always green curry for me, extra basil, and we'd watch reruns until I fell asleep on his shoulder. That's the kind of normal we had. Predictable, safe, the kind that tricks you into thinking it will last forever. But lately, the warmth in his eyes had cooled. I'd noticed it in the little things. How he sighed before answering me. How he scrolled through his phone in the dark. How he started locking the office door when he worked late from home. At first, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I'd been too distracted, too wrapped up in my freelance design projects. Or too tired from helping my mother through her surgery recovery. Marriage, I told myself, had its quiet seasons. Then came the whispers of something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but could feel it started one evening in March. I'd just finished washing dishes when I heard his phone buzz on the counter. Daniel was in the shower. The name that flashed across the screen made my stomach tighten. Maya, accounting. I remember it because it wasn't saved with a last name. Just that dash, that strange formality. Maya, accounting. I told myself it was work. That's what he did. Taxes, spreadsheets, long hours this time of year. But when I picked up the phone to silence it, a message preview popped up before the screen dimmed. I transferred what you asked. Don't worry, she'll never know. The words burned into me. I stood there for several seconds. The sound of the shower muffled through the door. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He'll never know. She'll never know. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, and backed away as if it might explode. I wanted to scream, but the sound that came out was a quiet gasp. When he walked out wrapped in a towel, humming, I couldn't even look at him. "Everything okay?" he asked, rubbing his hair dry. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's fine." It wasn't fine, but I didn't ask. Not yet. I told myself maybe it was business-related, maybe some client refund, a favor, a misunderstanding. Denial is softer than the truth, at least at first. For weeks, I lived in that uneasy space between knowing and not knowing. Daniel grew colder. He started staying late at work, sometimes past midnight. The first few times, I called to check if he was safe. After that, I stopped calling because I didn't like who answered. Not a man tired from working, but someone distant, impatient. Like my voice was interrupting something important. The first clue became a pattern. Receipts disappeared. The joint card declined at the grocery store once, and he brushed it off, saying there was a bank error. I wanted to believe him, but a seed of doubt had already sprouted. Then, one Saturday morning, while doing laundry, I found a printed bank statement shoved in the pocket of his jeans, one I'd never seen before. The header said Community First Credit Union, a bank we didn't use. My fingers trembled as I scanned down the page. There were transfers, large ones, to a name I didn't recognize. Over $12,000 across 3 months. By the time he came home that afternoon, I was sitting at the dining table. The paper laid out like evidence in a crime scene. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what is this?" He froze, his eyes darting from the paper to my face. Then he laughed. That soft, practiced laugh he used when he wanted to seem harmless. "Oh, that. It's a temporary account for a client. You know how messy things get during tax season." I stared at him. "A client with your personal address on file?" His jaw tightened. "You're reading too much into it." "May?" "I'm reading numbers, Daniel." Silence. Heavy, deliberate silence. He picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his pocket. "Let it go," he said, and walked upstairs. And like a fool, I did. For a little while, but the truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't disappear just because you turn your head. A few weeks later, I told him I wanted a divorce. I hadn't caught him with another woman, but I'd caught him lying, and somehow that felt worse. He didn't fight. He didn't cry or argue. He just nodded once, said, "If that's what you want." Then, the next morning, I opened my bank app and saw it. The savings account we'd built over 21 years. Every penny we'd tucked away for our daughter's college and for retirement, gone. Every cent transferred out overnight. I remember the sound that left my throat. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a sob. It was hollow, like the noise a house makes when it settles after a storm. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen counter drinking coffee. I stood there shaking, phone in hand. What did you do? I whispered. He didn't even look up. I took what's mine, yours. That was our savings, Daniel. He finally turned to me. His eyes were cold, empty. You wanted a divorce? You said you were done, so I made sure I'm taken care of. I could barely breathe. You stole from me, he shrugged. You'll survive. You always do. And then he walked out calm, casual, leaving his coffee half finished on the counter. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. If he thought I was done fighting, he didn't know me at all because I was going to stay. Not to forgive him, but to make sure he'd never forget what he'd done. I didn't cry that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, watching the first gray lights slip through the blinds, thinking about every bill I'd paid, every meal I'd cooked, every hour I'd spent believing we were a team. 21 years, gone in one transaction. The first few days after that were quiet, too quiet. Daniel still lived in the house, moving around like nothing had happened. He'd hum while shaving, flip through the newspaper at breakfast, make small talk about the weather. It was eerie how normal he acted. I started noticing little things. New cologne, freshly pressed shirts, a different ringtone on his phone. Something jazzy, something I'd never heard him use. He was careful, but not careful enough. And me. I played my part. I smiled when he walked in, made dinner like usual, even laughed when he made small talk about getting back to normal. He thought I'd accepted it, that I'd surrendered. But underneath the calm, I was learning to listen differently. 2 days later, I went to the bank in person. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The woman behind the counter, young, polite, wearing a name tag that said Alina, greeted me with a practiced smile. Mrs. Harper, how can I help you today? I need to confirm some recent activity, I said, handing her my ID when she looked up the account. Her expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of discomfort. It seems the funds were transferred to an external account, she said. Authorized under joint access. My chest tightened. Joint access? She hesitated. Yes. Mr. Daniel Harper. Can you tell me where it went? I'm afraid I can't give out details of another account holder, she said gently, almost apologetically. I forced a smile. That's fine. Thank you. But as I turned to leave, she lowered her voice. Mrs. Harper, off the record, you might want to check Community First, Credit Union. The same name from that forgotten statement I'd found in his jeans. That afternoon, I drove there. I told them I needed to verify an account connected to a potential fraud. The teller, an older man with kind eyes, asked for a few details. He typed for a moment, then looked at me carefully. Ma'am, I can't disclose client information, but if you're concerned about missing funds, you may want to file a joint dispute immediately. That confirmed it. The money was there. I thanked him, walked out into the humid air, and sat in my car with the engine off, the heat pressing through the windows. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was theft. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the quiet, forgiving wife. I was going to be patient, because Daniel loved control. He loved to think he was smarter, calmer, untouchable. So I would let him think exactly that. And when the time came, I'd take it all back. Every cent. Every ounce of dignity he thought he'd stripped away. I started documenting everything. Receipts, screenshots, emails, timestamps of his comings and goings. I didn't confront him again. Instead, I played the role of the tired, defeated wife. I let him move freely. I cooked his meals, nodded when he made jokes. About moving on, even helped him look over his work files. He had no idea that I'd installed a small camera inside the decorative vase in his home office, the same one he once said was too ugly too. Notice that camera captured everything. Every time he logged into that secret account, every time he made transfers to the same woman, Maya, and there it was, her name again, at first. I thought maybe she was just a coworker helping him hide money. But when I saw the way he smiled at his phone, that faint private grin, I knew. This wasn't just financial betrayal, it was personal. One evening I came home early from visiting my mother. I parked down the street, just out of sight. Through the living room window, I saw him sitting on the couch, laptop open, phone propped against a glass of wine. He was laughing softly, that kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years. Light, easy, real. When I walked inside a few minutes later, he scrambled to close the laptop, pretending to check emails. Long day, he asked, voice a little too casual. Very, I said. You? Just working on a Saturday? He shrugged. Quarterly reports. I nodded and walked past him, pretending not to notice the faint smell of perfume. Floral, sharp, unfamiliar, lingering in the air. That night, while he slept, I opened his laptop. He was careless. He hadn't logged out of the video call history. The name was there. Maya, T. I clicked it. Her profile picture showed a woman maybe 10 years younger than me, pretty in a polished way. Expensive nails, glossy hair, the kind of smile that knows its own charm. My stomach turned, but I stayed calm, because in that moment, everything crystallized. He didn't just steal money. He built a new life funded by the one we'd built together, and he believed he'd gotten away with it. The next morning, I watched him get ready for work. His tie was crooked, his watch gleaming, the one I'd given him for our 15th anniversary. "Need help with that?" I asked, stepping closer, fixing the knot as he avoided my eyes. He murmured a thanks, still distracted. I leaned in close enough for him to smell my perfume. "You look sharp today. Big meeting." He nodded, not noticing the slight tremor in my hands. "Something like that," he said. As he left, he kissed my cheek, a meaningless habit, and I smiled back. That was the last morning he'd ever look at me without fear, because while he was at work, I made an appointment with a lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Carla Nguyen, who didn't blink when I told her what he'd done. "You stayed married for a reason, right?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Yes," I said. "I want him to think I'm staying because I can't live without him." "And what do you want, Mrs. Harper?" "I want justice," I said softly, "and my money back." She nodded. "Then we'll start by letting him hang himself, legally speaking." Over the next few weeks, we built a case. Carla explained everything, because the funds were moved during the marriage without consent. I had legal grounds for recovery. All I had to do was stay calm, play my part, and gather proof. So that's exactly what I did. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his stories. I told friends we were working things out. And all the while, I was collecting evidence. Every bank transfer, every message, every lie. The more he thought I'd forgiven him, the bolder he became. He started bragging about investments, about plans for the future. One night I asked, lightly, casually, "So what happens if things don't work out for us, Dan? What if one of us wants out again?" He smiled, that smug, self-assured smirk. "Don't worry," he said. "You'll be fine. You've got your freelancing, your mom, your little projects. You don't need much." I smiled back. "Oh, I suppose you're right," I said. But inside, I promised myself something. He'd learn exactly how much I didn't need him, and when that lesson came, it would cost him everything he thought he'd secured. When Carla handed me the first subpoena, my hands were steady. The paper was ordinary, institutional, crisp edges, the courthouse seal, but inside it was the sort of authority I had never needed to feel before. For the first time since the savings vanished, I felt a small, fierce sort of relief. This was no longer only about money. It was about truth being written down where it couldn't be ignored. We started with banks, then moved outward. Carla explained the legal terms as if she were untangling a necklace: conversion, joint property rights, fraudulent transfers, constructive trust. She used words like weapons, and I liked the sound of them. "I'll file an emergency motion to freeze any assets linked to the transfers," she said, tapping the corner of the file. "We'll subpoena the credit union, the external accounts, and we'll ask for temporary custody of any contested funds while we investigate." "Will it work?" I asked plainly. "It will slow him down," she said, "and he won't like that." I pictured him, the man who always kept his shirts neatly ironed, who kept a wooden spoon in the same drawer, who called to check on my mother's recovery, pacing in some sterile office, suddenly unable to move money with a click. The thoughts steadied me. We also needed to account for the personal side. Carla advised against a public spectacle. The law is a better friend than gossip. But she also asked the question I had been avoiding. "Do you want him publicly named? In a filing? In front of family?" I thought of my daughter Ella, who slept in a smaller world of late-night texts in college classes, who trusted both her parents enough to text me a cheery "love you, Mom" every morning. I thought of the whispers that would follow if I filed a dramatic complaint in open court. I thought of dignity, of the small reverence of privacy. "I want him to be accountable," I said, "but I don't want to humiliate our daughter." "Keep it between us and the court if you can," Carla nodded. "We'll do it smart." In the weeks that followed, I let him believe I was unraveling. I let him see me write long notes and stare into space. I went through the motions of being the hurt, predictable spouse. It was a strange theater one where I had to be both actress and director. I made him tea with extra lemon. I placed his favorite biscuits on the plate and set them by his chair. I pretended not to notice when he kissed my cheek without looking me in the eye. But behind that calm face, I was doing things he would never imagine. I had the camera footage, the printed bank statements, the screenshots of his messages. I filed motions. I hired an accountant to trace wire trails. I paid for private searches and legal research out of my dwindling freelance funds. I watched each invoice the way one watches a heart monitor. The first legal success came like a quiet knock at the door, a notice that the court had frozen the external account linked to the transfers. The money was not in our account anymore, but it was stopped in its tracks. Daniel called me that evening, agitated and small. "You did this," he accused, voice dangerously low. There was no swagger in it, only surprise. I did what I had to, I replied, folding napkins with deliberate care. You did this first. He laughed, a short, brittle sound. You think a freeze will ruin me? I have other investments. He looked at me and I watched the calculation run across his face. He was trying to find the loophole, the angle that would let him slip free, maybe, I said. But you're learning you can't move things in secret anymore. That night he slept elsewhere. A thin mattress in the office where he pretended to work late. The house felt too big without his breathing beside me. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged with a certain purpose. We did not want to make the mistress Maya, the main character. Legally, she was a recipient of stolen funds, and she would be noticed. But Carla warned against a revenge fantasy that centered on her humiliation. Let the law do its work, she said. We can't set a trap that would risk your credibility. So instead of confrontation, we took paperwork to the credit union where the external account was held. The manager there, a woman in a blouse that matched her no-nonsense haircut, looked at the subpoena, at the copies of messages and the transfers. Her expression hardened in the way of people who are tired of being taken advantage of. We'll freeze the account and investigate, she said gravely. If funds were deposited from a joint account without authorization, that is a serious matter. It felt like watching a slow machine build a wall around the man I had loved. It was satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with cruelty. It was satisfaction born of fairness. When the credit union sent notice that their investigation found irregularities, transfers initiated from an account tied to our home, address and signed with details inconsistent with bank authorization, Daniel stopped smiling in public. His colleagues noticed he was jumpy. His mother, who lived 2 towns over and kept to her knitting and coffee mornings, called one Sunday afternoon and asked if anything was wrong. I told her truthfully that we were having financial trouble. I did not tell her how my life was being rearranged by subpoenas and hearings. And she, in her small, practical way, said, "Honey, if anyone treats you like that, you do what you need to do." Her voice was a small anchor. It reminded me that the people who practiced kindness kept people steady. One evening, Daniel returned home more frantic than I had seen him. He paced the kitchen, pushing chairs aside, muttering about frozen assets and how could she. For a moment, pure animal fear flickered in his eyes. For a moment, he looked like a man who had been stripped. "Will they find it?" he asked, not looking at me, double quotes. "Yes," I said simply. "They already have." He slammed his palm on the counter. "You set me up." "I set the truth," I corrected. "You set the theft." He swore softly, an ugly string of words that sounded foreign coming from him. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He begged, not to me, but to himself. He sank into a chair, head in hands. I could see the outline of the man he had been eroding under the weight of his choices. Neat and ordinary and human. I could have walked away then. I could have packed a bag and left while the court did its work. I did not. Not because I thirsted for his downfall, but because I wanted him to understand, truly understand the consequences of what he had done. So I stayed. I answered his thin jokes. I pretended to check up on my freelance clients. I continued to collect carefully and patiently the evidence that would make the case incontrovertible. And there was another thing I did, quiet, not flashy, and deeply personal. I started writing, not legal notes, but pages in a notebook I'd kept since my 20s. The kind you tuck under your pillow and forget you have. I wrote down dates, words he had said, the small cruelties and the half-realities that built the lie. I wrote about the smell of his cologne and the way he used to crease his nose when he laughed. I wrote about moments that hurt and moments that had once been tender. It grounded me. It made me remember that I was not merely an avenger or a victim. I was a person with a history of love, of mistakes, of dignity. That notebook would later become testimony of a life, not only the life he had tried to take from me, but the life I planned to reclaim. It began with an email, a short one from the court clerk with the subject line, "Order granted, hearing date set." When I opened it, I read the words 3 times, a mix of disbelief and cold satisfaction washing over me. The case was officially moving forward. The court had granted our motion to proceed against Daniel for fraudulent transfers and marital asset concealment. There would be a hearing, in person, public, on record. That meant people would know, not gossip, not whispers, facts, evidence. And maybe that's what scared him most. The week before the hearing, Daniel grew erratic. His office called twice to ask if he was sick. He hadn't shown up. He walked through the house as if every piece of furniture had betrayed him. I could smell the stress on him, that sour, metallic scent of fear and sleeplessness. His hair, once always neat, looked uncombed. He muttered into his phone at odd hours. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to find him sitting in the living room, the blue glow of his laptop painting him in eerie light. His face was drawn pale. On the screen, I saw spreadsheets, long columns of numbers, old transactions. His attempt to explain or perhaps rewrite what had already been done. "You can't fix it that way," I said quietly from the doorway. He jumped, startled, then glared at me. "You don't understand what this will do to me, to my career." "Then you should have thought about that before you emptied our savings." I was desperate. His voice cracked. "You said you were leaving, you were going to take everything, and I panicked." There it was. Not greed, not malice, panic, the same raw, pathetic kind that makes people throw away their whole lives in a single breath. I almost pitied him. Almost. "I wasn't taking everything," I said. "I just wanted peace." But now I looked at him, really looked, and said softly, "Now it's not about peace, it's about truth." The morning of the hearing was strangely calm. I wore a plain navy dress and the small silver earrings my mother had given me when I turned 30. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a woman scorned. I saw someone who had survived a quiet war at the courthouse. Carla met me with her usual calm authority. "Remember," she said, "we don't need to make a scene. The documents will speak for themselves." I nodded. "He's the one who will be loud," I murmured. And he was. When Daniel entered, his lawyer beside him. He looked smaller somehow, the way proud men do when they realize the room doesn't bend for them anymore. He avoided my eyes. Flipping through papers he clearly didn't understand. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a measured tone, began the session. Carla spoke clearly, every word anchored in truth. She laid out the timeline, the withdrawal of joint funds, the transfers to the secret account, the subsequent freezing of assets. She presented the bank records, the authorization discrepancies, and the account opened under a name that matched none of our known profiles but was traced to an address tied to Maya. When she mentioned that name, Daniel flinched. The courtroom fell silent. That heavy kind of silence that only happens when everyone knows what's about to break. The judge asked, "Mr. Wells, do you contest these findings?" He hesitated. His lawyer leaned in, whispering. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then, in a voice I had once known as steady, he said, "I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to steal." A collective murmur ran through the gallery. The judge tapped her pen once. Intent aside, funds were removed without consent. That constitutes misappropriation? Carla didn't smirk, didn't even shift. She simply added, "And the funds were not merely removed. They were used, spent on travel, lodging, and gifts for another individual. We have receipts." That was when the photographs entered the record. Simple. Damning hotel bills, flight confirmations, transfers. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I'd already lived every word of that betrayal. Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer looked as though he wanted to be anywhere else. The judge finally spoke. "Given the evidence, I'm ordering restitution of the full amount. Pending final divorce proceedings, Mr. Wells, you are prohibited from accessing any shared financial accounts until further notice." There it was. Not triumph, but closure. When the gavel came down, the sound was softer than I'd imagined. Just a dull thud, like a final door shutting gently. But the consequences didn't stop in that courtroom. Word traveled, not through gossip, but through the quiet efficiency of professional networks. His company placed him on indefinite leave. The internal audit he'd been part of was reassigned. His mother called me again, voice trembling. "What happened, dear?" she asked. "Daniel's been so withdrawn. He won't tell me anything." I took a breath. "He's made some financial mistakes and now he has to face them." She was silent for a moment. Then, softly, "I raised him to be better than that." "I know," I said gently. "Sometimes we don't recognize what's growing inside someone until it's too late." Ella found out 2 days later. She came home from college for the weekend and I'd been dreading the moment. She was my daughter, her father's pride, my heart's anchor. When she walked through the door, her smile was bright until she saw my eyes. "Mom," she said carefully, "is it true? Dad's being investigated." I nodded. "Yes, for the money." "For lying?" She covered her mouth. "He told me it was a misunderstanding." "I wish it were," I said softly. She sat down, eyes glassy. "How could he do that to you, to us?" I said slowly, "he thought he could fix his pain by controlling everything around him. Some people don't realize until too late that love isn't about control." She was quiet for a long while. Then she whispered, "I don't know if I can forgive him." "You don't have to," I said. "Not right away. Just promise me you won't let this teach you bitterness." She nodded, tears on her cheeks. And when she hugged me, I realized the real healing wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers too. A week later, Daniel moved out. Not in a storm, not with shouting, just quietly, a suitcase, a duffel bag, a few shirts still on hangers. I watched from the kitchen window as he loaded the car. There was a limp in his step, a weariness that comes when someone finally accepts they've lost the battle they started. Before he drove away, he turned once. Our eyes met through the glass. No anger, no tears, just a long, hollow acknowledgement. The kind that says, "We both know how this story ends." And as the car disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not joy, Not even relief, just stillness. The kind of stillness that means you're finally free from the noise. The first morning after Daniel left, the house felt foreign, too quiet, too orderly. For years, his voice had filled the space, his routines echoing through the walls. Now there was only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the old wall clock he'd once insisted on keeping despite its crooked frame. I made coffee in silence. The same brand I'd always bought, the one he used to complain was too bitter. I took a sip and smiled faintly. It wasn't bitter at all. It was strong. Maybe that's what he never liked about it. Or about me. I spent that first week reclaiming my home one drawer at a time. I cleaned out closets, donated half the clothes I hadn't worn in years, and opened the curtains he used to keep drawn because the glare gave him headaches. I wanted sunlight again. The more I cleaned, the more I realized how many little corners of my life had been shaped by his preferences. The way the couch faced the TV, the type of dinner plates we used, even the scent of the laundry detergent. Small things, but they told a bigger truth. I had shrunk myself slowly over the years to make room for him, and now, with him gone, I could finally stretch. Ella came home more often after that. She'd sit with me on the porch in the evenings, her knees tucked under a blanket, her head resting on my shoulder. "Mom," she said one night, "I'm proud of you. I didn't think you'd have the strength to go through all that and still smile." I laughed softly. There were days I didn't think I would either. But then I realized something. Pain doesn't disappear when you run from it. It just waits for you to stop. So I decided to stop running. She nodded, thoughtful. "I think Dad's still running." "Maybe," I said. "But that's his race now, not ours." In the months that followed, the court finalized the divorce. I was granted restitution for most of what he'd taken. The judge's tone had been professional but kind. "Mrs. Wells," she said as she handed down the ruling, "it takes courage to pursue justice with grace. Not everyone manages that." I'd smiled, grateful. Grace, that was the word I wanted to live by now. Daniel didn't appear in court that day. His lawyer said he was unwell. Later, I heard he'd moved to another city, taken a smaller job, started over. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't wish him anything, really. Some people aren't meant to be hated. They're meant to be learned from. 6 months later, I started volunteering at a local women's shelter. I didn't plan it. I just walked in one day, offered to help with bookkeeping, and never stopped going back. The women there came from all walks of life. Some had fled violence. Others had escaped quiet control, the kind that never leaves bruises but still breaks bones in spirit. When they told me their stories, I saw pieces of myself in all of them, the same confusion, guilt, and eventual resolve. One afternoon, I helped a young woman named Jenna file for financial independence from her husband. She was trembling, her hands clutching the pen like a weapon. "What if he finds out?" she whispered. "He already knows you're stronger than he thought," I said. "That's why he's afraid." She looked up at me, and for the first time, she smiled. Just a small, flickering thing, but it reminded me of how I must have looked when I finally stopped being afraid by spring. The house had changed. New paint, new curtains, new life. I planted roses in the backyard, the same kind my grandmother once grew. Daniel had always hated the mess they made. The petals scattered across the grass. I loved it. The mess meant life was happening. One morning, as I was tending to them, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, controlled, familiar. It was from Daniel. "I've thought a lot about what happened," he wrote. "Not because I want forgiveness, but because I finally see how blind I was. I lost the only person who ever truly cared for me. I don't expect a response. I just needed you to know I'm sorry." I read it twice. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the strange tenderness that comes when old wounds are touched. Without reopening, I didn't write back. Not because I hadn't forgiven him, but because some apologies are meant to be left as they are. Quiet and final. Instead, I placed the letter in the garden, beneath the rose bush, and covered it gently with soil, a burial of sorts. For the past, as the months rolled on, I found a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Mornings with coffee and music. Afternoons working part-time at a small accounting firm run by a woman named Marta, who believed in second chances. Evenings spent on the porch with a book and the sunset. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in moments, small, fragile, but real. And with peace came gratitude. Not for what had happened, but for what I'd learned. That strength isn't loud. And revenge doesn't always have to destroy. Sometimes, revenge is simply rebuilding your life so beautifully that the person who broke it can't recognize what they lost. One evening, months later, I hosted a small dinner for friends. We laughed, clinked glasses, and shared stories about heartbreak and healing. At one point, Carla, my lawyer-turned-friend, looked around the table and said, "You know, you're glowing these days." I smiled. "Maybe that's what freedom looks like." She raised her glass. "To freedom," then, And 2, never settling for less than we deserve. Everyone toasted. The glasses chimed like soft bells, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, quiet joy. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the dishes were done, I stepped outside. The air smelled of jasmine and rain, the moonlight touched the roses, and for a moment, I thought of the woman I had been, the one who cried quietly in her car, who begged for honesty, who stayed just long enough to plan her way out. She wasn't weak. She was preparing. I whispered into the night, "You did it." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. You know, when people hear stories like mine, they often ask the same question. Why didn't you just leave sooner? But here's the truth. Leaving isn't always the hardest part. Sometimes it's staying long enough to understand why you must never go back. When Daniel emptied our savings, I thought my world had ended. I thought revenge meant making him hurt the way he'd hurt me. But in the end, that wasn't justice. That was still giving him power. Real revenge. The kind that heals, not burns. Is rebuilding yourself so completely that the person who betrayed you can no longer touch the peace you've created? I didn't win by taking him down. I won by standing up. By facing the storm instead of hiding from it. By learning that grace doesn't mean weakness. It means refusing to let bitterness write your story for you. And now, when I look at my life, the quiet mornings, the laughter with my daughter, the smell of roses in the garden, I realize that everything I lost was just making room for what I truly deserved. So, if you're listening to this right now, sitting in your own silence, wondering if you have the strength to start over, you do. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you'll wake up and the pain will feel a little lighter. And that's how healing begins. Tell me, my friends, would you have done what I did? Would you have stayed? Not for love, but for the lesson? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story touched you tonight, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Real stories from real hearts. Good night.